Afternoon, everybody. We're having some more folks join us as we come on. Thank you guys for taking the time today. Meg Ryan with the League.
Hi, I'm Todd Godfrey.
And Carson Eilers with the League.
And we are here today to try to help you navigate the work that you're doing on the Senate Bill 174 subdivision compliance updates. We will kind of give a quick summary, but this is really a time for you to do Q&A. We'll talk a little bit about the resources we've also put together for you. We'll use the chat box, not the Q&A, and try to follow your comments. We can also, Carson, we can do the speaking thing, right?
Yeah.
If you raise your hand, we can unmute you and we can have a dialogue, because I think questions that one community has typically helps other communities as well. So I want to kind of first start off by a quick question for you all, and maybe just putting a yes, no in the chat. How many of you have not started the process of updating your subdivision chapter for state compliance? Okay, one brave soul.
Looks like there's one raised their hand. Whoever raised your hand, it looks like you lowered it again. Could you just put it up again so I can allow you to talk?
Sean, you haven't started yet? I thought you'd be all done. It's very disappointing. It's good to see you back. Haven't seen you.
Right, Kent, if you have a question, you're welcome to unmute yourself now and you can ask it. Just not started. Okay, thanks for clarifying.
Okay, so I've got a smattering. Looks like a few started. Some have thought about it. So let's just do a 2-minute recap on the requirements and some of the resources, and I'll start that, and then Todd, the attorney, can correct me since I'm not the attorney, and then we'll jump into your Q&A. So first off, Carson, maybe we'll just talk about, we've dedicated a web page on the ULCT website for resources for compliance, and so on that web page, Carson will either drop the link or pull it up or show you. We have the summary of the bill that we did last spring. We have an ongoing kind of updated question and answer sheet that Todd's been compiling as he goes out and talks to folks, kind of frequently asked questions on there as well for you. And then we also have what are we calling it today? It's a
Template has been
template. So not a model ordinance, because we don't recommend those, but this is a template, and this template actually takes the areas of compliance, and just to sort of review for you, those areas of compliance are found in the LUDMA, and what we're talking about specifically is 109A 604.1 and 109A 604.2. Those are the two sections under the state statute that have the requirement for you. And when I say you, we're kind of directing this. There's a 2-tiered time clock as far as regards to compliance. And the 83 cities that have the pleasure of also doing the moderate income housing plan report have a due date, and Carson's got it up there on the screen, of this coming December 31st, 2024. Oh, February 1st. Sorry, I can't read that far away. February 1st. Sorry, I was backwards. No alarm bells there. Thank you. February 1st coming up in 2024, and then the remainder of the state has the due date in December 31st, 2024. So we're putting together these resources for everybody, but really wanting to help those 83 cities and communities that have the impending deadline of having compliance come forth. And so I think the majority of you on the call today are within that category. There may be some others. We'll have further resources coming, but they're not available at this time. But what we have on the website right now is a starting point. I guess it's hard to tell without a show of hands. Looking forward to starting, Sean. There you go. Let's maybe just do some bullet points on the summary, and then let's get into your questions. So you know the resources, you know the due date, and now sort of what are the main sort of takeaways?
Yeah. So I didn't come prepared to just talk for an hour. So we're hoping you all have questions and then you'll start sticking those in the chat or raising your hand. I just want to go over some of the big picture things that this does and kind of the decision points you'll have as you're redrafting your ordinance. For the first point, we don't have concept plan review anymore, but we need to accommodate something like a concept plan review for developers who request it. So with my clients, I'm not necessarily codifying that anywhere, but I'm advising, my planning departments, you need to be prepared to sit down and meet with a developer who wants to look over their subdivision plan even before they submit a formal application. So that is something we have in the law now. The other point is when you get to the preliminary plat, you're going to need to make a decision about who your land use authority is that's going to review the preliminary plat. That can still be your planning commission. It does not have to be. You can keep subdivisions wholly at a staff level or at a committee level. It just cannot include any members of your city council, your governing body. So keep that in mind. The other, I think, policy decision you need to make, this has been in the law for a number of years now, is whether or not you're going to hold public hearings on your subdivision preliminary plat. That's something I think you need to talk about with your decision makers, your policy makers, and decide how you're going to move that forward. If you do decide to receive public input on your subdivisions, then you can decide how you want to do that. If you want to do it in the old-fashioned public hearing context, if you want to do what I've always called kind of the UDOT process, where you have a way or a means for people to submit written comments on a proposal and to have those forwarded to your land use authority for a preliminary plat. And when you get to the final plat, I think you need to decide exactly how you're going to process that, but that does not include your planning commission, still does not include the governing body, any members of your city council. It's intended to be a staff level. I know for a lot of you in smaller towns that don't have staff, there's some angst over that part of the process. I'm advising a lot of those smaller towns, you generally have somebody on your planning commission who has been around a while and understands the process. I've been using those folks with what I would call consultant professionals, your engineer, to help process those final plats and get those prepared and ready for signature and recording. So those are kind of big picture things we're looking at.
Yeah, and in that template, we've actually laid out all of the provisions that are required under the statute and tried to highlight the policy choices that you have that Todd hit on a little bit. So we can dive more into that, but I really, again, this is time for you guys to ask questions, and I'm gonna pick on Scarlett, who said they're already drafted and hopefully going to planning commission, and maybe just ask her the choices they made and maybe start that off as a conversation point, but then we'll open it up to questions. So Scarlett, did you have what decisions did you make as far as the land use authority, and have you had any other kind of hiccups as you've been walking through it, or how's it been for you for the process? And Carson, I don't know if you want to unmute her. Scarlett not there. All right. Well, Scarlett, and Bryn has one too. So Bryn, do you want to jump in and take that question? Either of you? How's it been for you, and what choices did you end up making, just to give some, since you guys are so far ahead already?
So Scarlett's saying she doesn't have a mic, so
Okay.
they are going to their planning commission as the administrative land use authority, if I'm reading that right, and then no public hearing.
Cool. Well, that's helpful. Bryn, any thoughts? What do you guys
Yeah,
do?
can you hear me?
Yeah,
Yeah, so we did the same thing, planning commission, and then staff would be the administrative land use authority approving the final, no public hearing. So that part wasn't too complicated.
Have you been holding public hearings before this revision on subdivisions?
No, we haven't been already, so that was pretty easy for us, yeah. But we haven't talked to the council yet, and yeah, the planning commission has already been through it 2 or 3 meetings, and they're good, but yeah, but they're not as affected as the council are, I don't think so.
and question for you, one part of the ordinance talks about that we have to have a, application and a checklist, posted and available. And the reason that that's important is because we need to make that complete application determination to start the whole time clock process. So I'm wondering, what decision did you make? Did you come up with a checklist that sort of looked at your, not only your application materials, but your design, subdivision design improvement standards? Or did you codify that, or did you leave it open? What decisions did you make when you had that, choice?
We did a checklist and we ended up putting it in the code, which is probably not my preference, but that's what we did. And it's the entire, so it's like 4 additional pages in our code with every detail. So yeah, we codified the whole thing.
And were your development standards already codified and updated, or did you I find a lot of communities are having to do that.
No, we had to do all that too.
Okay,
I mean, so we redid the entire subdivision chapter.
wow.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I see that Melinda's asking, why did you decide to do it that way with a public hearing? And I think Scarlett was saying they didn't do a public hearing. So Melinda, I don't know, did you have another question on that? Okay, thanks, Scarlett. That's helpful as well. And I think what we might do also is, as these checklists, and they're going to be unique, right? Because your development standards are unique, but we'll just post some samples. And again, that's something I think really takes some time, not only the process that you've decided in your community, but your design standards are going to be unique for now. And so we want to make sure that we, give you ideas, but it's not a boilerplate idea. So, other questions as you're thinking about, even people who are beginning to think about this? Are there decision points that you want us to help walk you through?
Looks like Scott Perks raised his hand.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing I was kind of thinking through, North Logan City has just had paper applications up to this point, and so we're taking this opportunity to digitize and go with like a digital submittal system where we'll have our checklist incorporated into that system. Felt like it was the right time to rip off the Band-Aid and to digitize with this step we're taking anyway. So we're already customers of City Inspect, and so we're going to use that platform to put all of our development review applications onto the platform. Is anybody else doing something like that where they're digitizing as they're making these updates to their code? I haven't touched our code yet, but I've kind of been gearing up for the digitization and then adjusting our code as we go.
Okay, yeah, you guys can drop in the chat. I don't know of any, but that's a great kudos to you for taking that extra effort.
Will you show me that full comment?
And yeah,
We've got a question from somebody with the separation of powers government where the mayor holds all the administrative powers of a city.
right.
And the question is, are they still sending their subdivisions to the mayor for a final review? And I don't work with any true separation of power cities. So I don't necessarily know what the answer is to that, John. I will tell you my take on that. We haven't addressed in the new statute everything that I think would satisfy a recorder's office. And I have some concern that if a mayor's signature doesn't appear on a plat somewhere, some of our county recorders may have issues recording the plat. And so even in my non-separation of power cities, where we aren't sending subdivisions to the council at all. I'm leaving a mayor's signature on the plat, and I'm just telling my mayors that when an engineer and a planner tell you the plat has been approved, you get to sign it. And that's it. I don't see that as a true violation of the spirit of the statute in any way. I don't think anybody's gonna raise a big issue with it. But I have had some concerns that recorders may have had an issue if there isn't some signature from the chief executive officer of a city that accepts dedications and things like that. So that's my thinking on that.
Great. Oh, Scarlett has a mic now. Do you want to pipe in then? Scarlett's got a mic. And any other questions, please drop them in the chat. Again, this is here to try to answer thoughts that you guys have. Hey, Scarlett.
So we haven't, whoops, sorry.
We hear you perfectly, Scarlett.
Oh, I thought there was an echo, sorry. We haven't had our council involved since about 2007, but we have had our mayor signing the plats as acceptance on the city as well. So, and our recorders have not chastised us for doing that. So that's the way we've done it since 2007. So we don't hold public hearings because since it's an administrative duty, it's almost a setup for failure to invite the public to tell you their concerns, and then we have to politely look at them and say,
But it doesn't
we
matter.
understand that, but we still have to approve this because they're meeting the law. So we took public hearings out of the equation back in about 2007 too. We tried to streamline it quite a bit back then. The biggest difference from us in this is that, of course, the review schedule will be a little bit more challenging, and then not having the planning commission see the final plat. That's really the difference for us.
Scarlett, can I ask you a question? In your preliminary plat process, prior to these statutory changes, what was the level of technical detail you got in your preliminary applications? Did you get 90% engineer drawings?
No, we
Okay.
we did ask them to show existing and proposed infrastructure on their preliminary plats. We asked them to show pipe sizes. We asked for grades, but we didn't usually get that. We did ask them to show grades on street grades on the preliminary plat. But I would say maybe we asked for 30% construction drawings. Just on the preliminary plat itself. That's one of the questions I've kind of been struggling with. So the way it's written, do we get the construction drawings with the preliminary plat now, kind of preliminary construction drawings, and then when they bring the final plat application, it's the full blown construction drawings? That's kind of where we're struggling.
So I'm advising my clients to take very minimal engineering stuff with the preliminary plat and to focus on what I would call more of the planning aspects. The lots, some of the dimensional standards with the lots, but not focusing hard on the engineering and pushing that to the final plat. And I think the way the statute is set up, it accommodates those engineering reviews, the more technical reviews, better in the final plat process. That's why I'm advising my clients that way. We have the 4 review cycles, and I think those are really pointed toward the engineering detail for these plats. So that's the way I'm advising. And that's what makes the most sense to me under the statute.
Okay.
But do note though, and I don't know, right now, and I'm not countering our own attorney, but it does say in
Yeah.
604,
It does.
6042, number 3B, just that within the municipality, the complete preliminary subdivision application includes the application, owner's affidavit, electronic copy of all plans, and the preliminary subdivision plat drawings. So
Yep.
that's where there's sort of that gray area, and I agree that the final stuff and where you have the redlining opportunity should be later in the process, but
Yeah.
that may be a switch for some communities, because I know some get it all up front, but I guess, you know, now with this in statute, we just need to at least be cognizant that something's coming in, right?
Yeah, and I don't know of many cities that didn't actually want a draft Mylar at preliminary, but that Mylar often didn't have much of the background engineering detail to go with it. My sense is under the current statute, that would still be compliant and would be okay. I just know I'm pushing all that heavy engineering detail to the final process. And one of the reasons I'm advising my clients to do that is I think the whole intent of the change here was to push the decisions to the people who are most appropriate to make the decisions. And on that fine engineering detail, it's very rare that the appropriate party has been our planning commissions. That's usually a consultant or an in-house engineer's job. And so I'm advising that way. I know we have a lot of planning commissions that have staffed with expertise to handle these things. So you may be in a different place in your city.
Yeah. All right, Bryn's saying, yeah, that it was a shift for them to do that, and that's, yeah, and again, that's somewhat of a, can I be as bold to say a policy choice that you can shift that, but I think that is something that we've found that's sort of new for communities, but so it'll be interesting to see how that works in practice. And then our friend John says again, are cities generalizing this process for all their subdivisions or just for the so-called easy ones? And so do you mean expanding over to commercial, industrial, outside of the current limitation, which only applies to single family, two family and townhome? And I think that's another policy choice that we laid out in the pathways template. But I guess that's something to consider if you think you can do it within the time frame for those of you that have the February 1st. But maybe it's and if it's easy, great, but that is something to ponder for sure. Like, does this make sense?
Well, I'll tell you my thought on that, John. And the larger sort of more commercially oriented, or even to some extent, the mixed use type projects, in my experience, the subdivision has been the easy part. And it's been a technical thing at the very end of a process. If you're doing a major commercial development, that's usually done on a partial basis, and sometimes they'll sell off particular, they want a lot, divide something so they can sell off certain pieces. That's been the smallest part of the review process. In a large, multi-family apartment kind of a project, those are generally done on a parcel basis. Sometimes there's not a subdivision that's necessary with those things, and it's all site plan. My clients, as a general rule, are pushing this through their entire subdivision process. It's not universal, but most of them are pushing this through their entire subdivision process, even the multifamily stuff. The exception is kind of the sensitive lands projects, and they're doing that for the sake of being able to do the more intensive engineering review of those issues.
And let's just point that out for a second. Again, in the statute, again, in 9A 6042, there is a provision number 2 that says the review cycle restrictions and requirement of this section do not apply to the review of subdivision applications affecting property within identified geological hazard areas. So unpacking that, if you have a sensitive lands ordinance codified with provisions or a map that's been approved, right? Those would fall into this arena, but make sure that you have both of those things done, that it's not, right, it's something that you have on the books.
Yeah, that is correct. I don't think we can, like in grandma, we can designate something after a request comes in. That doesn't work for subdivisions. We gotta have those areas designated already. Brent had a question that said, should the code specify who the administrative land use authority is? I am advising my clients to do that in the code, but all of my clients now identify who the land use authority is for all of their land use decisions. So I'm having them identify who their administrative land use authority is. And sometimes then they're codifying what has been a loose development review committee, you know, where you have your planner, your engineer, your fire marshal, your, those folks. Now that was just kind of an internal review. Now they're codifying what that is. But yeah, I do think it's a good practice to identify who your administrative land use authority is for the subdivision.
Right, back to the plain language rule that we all deal
Yeah.
with, right? Make it clear and objective as possible. So let's leap into another one since we're shy on questions here, which I take it to mean that you guys have this all figured out and you're ready to go. No questions, which we appreciate, but let's talk about the one that I always get mystified with and get Todd's advice on, the combined preliminary and final plat. If you choose to do a combination in review, what is your interpretation of how the time clock on review works under the statute?
I'm advising my clients that if they have concurrent processing of a preliminary and final, they should apply the final plat processing requirements to that. So I'm not buying 15 days at the front end and then going to the 20-day review cycles. I'm telling them, once you take the application, if you tell them you're going to process it concurrently, process it under the final plat time guidelines. And I am asking them to make that distinction in ordinance.
Okay. Oh, good. Thanks, John. We need some questions here. Many communities want to hang on to the concept plan. They view it as a benefit to all the applicants. So we're ending up with several processing paths instead of what used to be just one.
I need them to explain to me what that means at the end. I am aware that many communities really want to hang on to the concept plan. I understand that.
And right now, just to
I can jump
clarify,
in.
yeah, to clarify right now, you can't do it unless the applicant agrees to it
Or request.
or
Yeah.
requests it.
Yeah.
You can.
So I'm just throwing in that does mean we're ending up in a lot of these communities with more than one process, right? And that's really contradictory to me to this simplification in a sense that was attempted by the legislature. To me, it just means that we now end up with a lot of places that say we're not getting rid of our concept plan. Yes, it's optional for the easy ones, but we're gonna keep that for everybody else. And we now have in our ordinance, instead of one process, we got 2 or 3 or whatever it ends up being.
So what you're saying
It's more
is for every-
complicated, actually.
Yeah, so John, what you're saying is that for everything other than the single family, 2-family or townhome project, they still have a concept plan requirement in their process. Is
Yeah.
that what you mean? Yeah,
Not in the sensitive lands and everything else, yes.
right.
But
Okay.
yeah, it's just, to me, it didn't simplify things, I don't think, for a lot of these communities. I think it actually made it more complicated.
Yeah, I get it. And I think that's unfortunate also. And it's that byproduct of the concept plan has been something we all have really relied heavily on. Let me tell you the problem that I've seen from my seat with the concept plan review. And this is not an isolated thing. This happened over and over. But I have seen, I can't count how many times where a developer will bring in a concept plan to a city and the city's ordinances say nothing vests at the concept plan application. The developer will show them their concept plan and the city will immediately pass a temporary zoning regulation that prohibits applications in a particular zone and then change the ordinance in a way that just blows up the application because they don't like it. And so Scott had a question, we can still require at least one pre-application meeting, correct? I'm advising my clients on that, no, you cannot. And so that's why we're in this place where we don't have a concept plan review.
So
Okay. Go
I
ahead.
hear you, but I never heard that until you mentioned that down in St. George. So I've just never heard that the concept plan's been wielded in that way. But whatever, it's, we have what we have, I guess. So,
Yeah. And I appreciate the difficulty with, you know, having this apply in the narrower sense and then maybe actually creating something other than what we were hoping for. I hope that's not the case, but I can see what you're saying.
So Scarlett has another question about the 20-day time frame, and this is within the final application, subdivision application. If the applicant doesn't respond for several months, can we have the application expire? And the advice is.
So that's a complicated question, Scarlett. I'll tell you the way I'm advising my clients. There's a provision in 604.2 in that review cycle restriction portion of the statute that says if an applicant doesn't respond within that same 20-day time frame, the city has additional time on its review. So that's one point to set aside. If something sits dormant for several months, there's also a provision in LUDMA. I can't give you the site today, and I'm sorry for this, but it requires an applicant to act with reasonable expediency on their own application, right? And I think that provision is intended more towards an approved land use. So something to the effect of, we actually approve a final subdivision plat, and then for a period of a year or 2 years or 3 years, they don't record. Or we give a site plan approval for a project, and then for a period of several years, they don't do anything to execute on the approvals. I think it's more oriented towards that. But there would be a point in time where I would look at an application that was sitting dormant, nothing happening, and I would start writing letters to an applicant and saying, you need to move this application forward, or we're going to consider it expired, right? And a lot of us have time clocks in our ordinances for the time at which a preliminary plat approval is vital, and then it goes by the wayside, or for final plat. I don't know that we necessarily need to have something in our ordinance to look at an application that's been sitting dormant during the preliminary review process for 9 months to a year and say, if we don't get action on this within the next 30 days, we're going to consider the application to have expired. You'll have to resubmit. I don't think that's outside the lines. I don't think it's inappropriate. I do think it's important, though, that if we're going to start saying something's expired and we don't have an ordinance provision on it, that we need to be communicating really clearly with applicants about it. So.
Yeah, and just for reference, that's in, as Todd had mentioned, it's 9A 604.2, and it is down in item number, let's see, 5E. And it also talks about that if the applicant makes some material change to a plan set, that the municipality has the discretion to restart the review process at the first review of the final application, but only on that part that has a material change. So
Yeah.
I know nobody's executed the sort of processing part of this. We're just trying to put in place the mechanics. So I think that'll be some interesting, come February or March, that'll
Yeah.
be interesting. And I'm sure we'll see what corrections may come. And just also to note, not substantive, but some tweaks in names, nomenclature, and what we're calling a plan versus a plat versus an application that Todd's been working on for this legislative session. So that it's not going to be we're still going to have the bare bones of this process and review cycles, but there will be some hopefully clarification coming soon. All right, looks like we're getting some more questions.
Yeah, there's a great question in there about how we handle a revised plat and vacations, either for easements or streets.
Okay.
And I have told my decision makers, my planning commissions, my councils, that that's going to end up in my cities in a bifurcated process where my planning commission or administrative land use authority will review an amended plat, but then the portions that are required for vacation, either streets or easements or anything else, will go to the city council in a separate format. I'll prepare a vacation ordinance or something like that that a council will consider. And my administrative land use authority's decision on the amended plat will be subject to and conditioned on the council's approval of the vacation of easements, streets, whatever it may be. So I am not technically taking to my council a plat or for, an amendment but I'm having them deal with the vacation question because that's still their function under the law.
So you're kind of separating out the processes.
Yeah.
And so would they do that vacation by ordinance? They decree?
That's how I'm doing
Okay.
my vacations. I've always done those by ordinance.
So you have an ordinance. It's kind of like when you have to do a variance before a project even starts. So you
Yeah.
can separate that process out and then you go through the land use authority review for the final plat.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's a good segue to make one other point. So many of us have in our ordinances now these planned unit development processes or plan development processes where we alter the fixed dimensional standards of a zoning ordinance, or we increase density or something else like that. Those decisions are legislative in my view. Those kinds of decisions that alter the underlying entitlement of a zone are legislative in nature. And I would advise you strongly that for your plan development processes that are legislative, you take those to your council prior to doing a finalized subdivision so that the legislative decision is made and then your subdivision part can follow.
Yeah, and it looks like Valerie, you've got that exact same point that Todd's making. So yeah, something to think about looking at that other section. And that is one other thing that I found with folks that are getting into this is it's kind of a cleanup of other sections.
Yeah.
So to make sure it all sort of relates.
Yep.
All right, other questions, comments? Here we go. Melinda, can you explain what this means for lot line adjustments? Currently, we require a new Mylar to be recorded.
I tell everybody in the state with a lot line adjustment question that they have to call Sean Guzman, because I have never stuck my head into that statute, and that's the last thing I want to do. It's been such a mess in the last 2 years. Melinda, I don't have an answer for you on that. What I will tell you is this: if we have a lot line adjustment that requires a plat under both the statute and a city ordinance, then I'm going to process that through an administrative land use authority. You know, the way we generally have. If it's not something that requires a plat and it's a counter approval for a planning department, I don't see this necessarily being implicated. The issue with all of those are the public utility easements on the sides or the front. And if we adjust the boundaries, those sometimes get affected. I'll leave to the cities the way they think that's the appropriate way to do it.
Todd, I'm gonna pipe in. It's Jamie.
Oh, Jamie, of course.
Hi, Tom, Jamie.
So I agree with you. I mean, I think, and in fact, I just did a presentation to our local surveyors here in Southern Utah. What the statute says on lot line adjustments, parcel boundary adjustments, all that kind of stuff, is that it doesn't require a subdivision plat. What it does not say is that it doesn't require a plat amendment. And we have told them, and the recorders have told everyone, that lot line adjustments within an existing subdivision, yes, you can record them, but it is still going to require a subdivision plat amendment. And so those, a plat amendment is required. The reason is, and Scott, I just said pipes up, the plat amendment is required for the recorders to be able to tax it correctly. And they are fit to be tied, but you are still going to require, if, for example, if you're changing the line between two parcels in an existing subdivision plat, especially if you're bringing property into the subdivision, it's still going to require a plat amendment. So how these rules apply to plat amendments versus new plats remains to be seen, but probably the same process. And it's probably, good idea, like you said, to process them the same for site plan reviews for the commercial and multifamily projects too. So.
Yeah, so Jamie, I love that you and Sean are weighing in on the lot line adjustment, and I'm telling you now, I will never weigh into that. That will always be your area.
That is a fight we've been fighting for a long time.
Yes, and I'm content to have you continue that relationship with the surveyors forever. What I will also tell you, however, is that Salt Lake County has treated those things far differently over the years. And we have not, and even to some extent, Davis County, in my experience, we've not had issues with them necessarily when when property owners submit a lot line adjustment document, even within a subdivision that changes a line. We've not necessarily had the recorders coming back to us and saying, you've got to do a plat. So it's just kind of one of those interesting things we get across the state.
Yeah, when I had my county hat on and was representing recorders, I can tell you that, you know, they had a lot of pushback to this because of the way they do their thing. And I looked really carefully at the language of the statute. And I'm very comfortable saying you're probably still going to have to do a plat amendment if it's required by the jurisdiction.
What I will say is if it's required by the local county, there's no use fighting the fight, just do the
That's
plat.
exactly right.
So Melinda had a question. Is there a different definition for plat and subdivision plat amendment? And I am actually having my clients codify a plat amendment process. We are treating it differently, although it looks like the subdivision approval process.
Right now, the code defines a subdivision. It does not define a plat amendment. And that's why I say I'm pretty comfortable saying you're still going to need a plat amendment.
Okay, and then before that, Jamie Scott was saying, a plat amendment is required only if the number of lots within the subdivision is changing,
And that's a commonly held view across the state that is not accepted by every county recorder.
I disagree with that. I disagree with that statement.
So I kind of looked through this and I literally put all of the state codes side by side to try to figure this out because it was driving me insane. And I ultimately came down to if they're merging lots and so it's reducing the number of lots within the subdivision, or if they're dividing it to create a new lot, then a plat is required. Otherwise, it's just a lot line adjustment where you're just moving a line between two existing lots. Or if it's a parcel line adjustment where it's between two parcels that are not platted, that's where I kind of came down to my understanding. And it sounds like this is a much more complex topic than I thought. And there's many viewpoints I didn't realize were floating out there, but that's where we've kind of, at least in North Logan City, we've said you need to submit a new Mylar and have a plat amendment if the number of lots is changing, not just moving a lot line to or fro a couple feet here or there.
I can tell you from the recorder's end, even if you're just adjusting a line between two lots within an existing subdivision, they're going to want you to do a 2-lot amendment. You don't have to do the full subdivision. It's just amending those 2 lots. And you record that. And most recorders are going to require that.
I prefer that. I mean, honestly, I like the idea of platting every change. That's my preference. It's clean, it's familiar. I think that makes sense, but it looks like there might be some inconsistency or some need for clarity in the code, because I like platting when a change is made, so it's reflected and it's not a weird meets and bounds description, legal description. But anyways, I don't want to get us too far off topic. That was just my understanding.
Yeah, so John's question at the bottom is
the loaded one.
the ultimate can of worms question. John, I don't have the language in front of me and the way it reads, but I am not advising my clients to mail a notice to everybody in the community. My recollection, and I have to think through how this worked in the noticing, but I think we are amending our ordinances so that we define the affected area for different kinds of applications. And for code amendments that aren't specific to an individual zone, we're defining the affected area in a way that doesn't require a mailed notice to every person in the community. I'll be honest with you, it's a workaround. It's a little disingenuous in reality, but I can't believe they intend us to send a postcard to everybody in the community every time we amend our ordinance. So,
and what Todd and John are referring to is the noticing provisions that were changed last session, that we do have a bill file open to amend and correct. And what it specifies is that when you adopt a new land use ordinance, you have to notify every real property owner and resident within the municipal or
Well,
city or
it's-
town
it's
boundaries.
The affected area
But,
specifically.
then there's another paragraph.
There's
that
another
goes
paragraph that
down.
complicates it. and makes it
So,
worse.
so what Todd is saying, you know, and I know a couple of communities, I don't know if Heber is on the call, so they went in and they made an amendment to their definitions to add affected area to do very much that same fact, and I think that that's something, but then noticing for definitions, you have to notice to the entire community, so it's a call that your attorney is going to have to
Yeah.
make. We are trying to update and clarify that and reduce that burden. But for you coming up with the February 1st, for those of you coming up with the February 1st deadline, that may be something to try to get in place beforehand, or just
Yeah.
make the call on how you're gonna proceed
Yeah.
with that, so.
And with that particular code amendment with my clients, I'm not sending a postcard to everybody to define affected area either. So we're taking a practical approach to that, and I hope it works, because it's a nightmare if it doesn't, obviously.
Yeah, great.
Brent's, yeah, John, thank you for making everything hard. Brent's question, if the PC approves a preliminary and then staff is reviewing the final, a change is made, can you take it back to the PC to amend the preliminary? Yes, you can. I also am, I have always taken, I guess, a relatively broad view, and without defining a material change between preliminary and final, I've kind of applied a standard like that. If the change is really minimal, I don't think the addition of a lot is minimal. But if the change is minimal, I don't always take it back between preliminary and final. I also think one of the things we do frequently when we review preliminaries is the land use authority will give an approval with a list of conditions, and you make sure those conditions are part of the final without sending that back for another look at a preliminary. That's a normal process, and I think that's fine. But I do think if we're changing a road location in a subdivision in a way that affects property outside the subdivision, if we're adding lots, if we're, you know, some of those things that I think are more significant, I would take back for a revised preliminary approval.
Okay, so we're in the weeds, which is great. That's why we're here. But if someone has just basic questions too, there's no wrong questions. We may hopefully aren't giving wrong answers, but please, you know, if you're at a different stage in the process, let us know. Or if anyone else has anything to share with other colleagues, now's sort of your opportunity. We will also be doing more trainings throughout the fall, but I know a lot of you already, you know, given the time frame and the review process you have to go through, it like now is when you need to be in that process. And then we will, for those of you that are outside of those 83 cities, we will have not only more resources, but do kind of a more broader outreach through the Association of Governments. And if it works with the counties, with UAC, trying to get that out for the rest of the state. But it looks like we're not having any more questions, which we're happy about. That's good.
Yeah.
Any other things you want to stump Todd on while we have the opportunity? Any other comments or thoughts? Okay, and once again, Carson, maybe you could just drop in the webpage link for those that may have joined later. We have resources on the ULCT webpage that we put together to help assist you. You can always give Carson and I an email, and if we can't answer it, we'll get a hold of Todd. And then I think Scarlett had a question.
I do. It's a quick one. It's about charging fees. We always charge the fees at the time of the application. Except for if we're using a professional service, and we have right on there in the application that those fees will be billed separately based on the consultant's fee. But in the new code, it says a breakdown of fees due upon approval of the application. So does that mean we can't charge the fee until after the application has been approved?
In my opinion, no. I think you can continue with your process, and I don't think any developer is going to raise an issue with that.
Okay.
I wouldn't alter that process. So
Okay,
And I think it was written that way specifically because of the fact that a lot of us have those charges that become due on approval. So there's always the application fee up front, but so many of us wait to make that final, I guess, invoicing until we know what our internal costs are. So I think you're fine, Scarlett.
thank you.
Well, on behalf of everyone here and our director, Cameron, thank you guys for everything that you do. I know we've had a lot of challenges over the last year and a half or so. And what we're here to try to help you work through that. So please let us know what we can do. And look forward to Friday Facts, look forward to that webpage being updated with more resources. But please reach out to us with questions. And again, thank you guys for what you do on a day-to-day basis for our communities and towns in Utah.
Yep. If you continue to have questions, use the, on the league's website, the legal hotline. We'll see those and respond to those the best we can. Thank you.
Okay, we'll sign off.
Thanks, everyone.